Lady Fondly. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Now, this tragic news has been breaking in the last hour. How did you hear the news and how are you reacting to it? Prof, kindly unmute.
Yes, thanks for having me. I got the news on my platform. I have a platform. I belong to a platform where things really quickly circulate. So I got the news, I think, within minutes of passing away. I was shocked because we never heard she was sick. In fact, during that something his funeral, I remember seeing her with her children going to pay homage to Asante Hene. Even I understand, it is correct, that yesterday or so, she even went to commiserate with Mr. Ifa, former head of the Fidelity Bank. So it came very suddenly. That's, for me, that's what the shock is. Now, you know, Nana Konadu Agyeman, she's one of a kind, I have to say. She's one of a kind. Because if you recall the so-called revolutionary days, she was one pillar in the whole movement, not at the forefront, but behind her husband, who was the leader of the revolution. And even if you don't like her, you have to admire her courage in many ways. Let me jump over a few. Look, he was politically active and politically engaged. And to some extent, I can even say that she helped in shaping the politics of this country, for better or for worse, as she did. You know, she had the courage to even break away from a party that I believe she was part of the founding, that's the NDC, to form her own political party. All this is to demonstrate the political courage of the person that we have just lost. So, for me, I think talking about her, we can also not forget talking about her advocacy for women empowerment. The 31st December movement that she formed, whether you like it or not, she went far with it in supporting women in the country to be empowered in various ways, in industries and other ways. So looking back, I think Nana Konadu Agyeman certainly lived a very, very fruitful life. Turbulent life, I should say, because the late 70s and the early 80s were not the best years in our country, but she was engaged in many ways. And I just admire the courage with which she supported her husband to achieve whatever that they achieved. So I have high admiration for her.
Yeah, Prof. Darrell here. Let's delve deeper into her legacy in politics. What would she be remembered for?
The first thing that comes to mind certainly is the women empowerment issue. She was such a strong advocate for women empowerment through the 31st December movement. In fact, she, in many ways, was even a model to some ladies, some young girls, and perhaps women. Just the way she articulated her passion for empowering women. And I think that's one singular act. And for many years, she pushed that until, of course, the 31st December women somehow fizzled out. And even beyond that, occasionally, we did hear her talking about it and taking steps to accomplish that. So her legacy certainly, I will find that in her woman empowerment movement, which was pursued through the 31st December women. Also, I think we have to also remember her. Again, when I use the word courage, I mean, is it not every wife has the courage to be behind a husband who was a firebrand, who made a lot of enemies and a lot others who also loved him. But this woman was constantly behind the husband. And what also I have to say, in the midst of all that, this woman raised 4 beautiful children, almost by herself, because the man was too busy doing politics all the time. From stories, even not staying home most of the time. But this woman single-handedly, I think, has succeeded in bringing these children to a level that all of us can admire. So There are so many good qualities in her, and this is not to brush off a certain thing that there are people don't like, including myself, because I also know the story of her involvement in the murder of the three judges and the soldier, military major or something. And certainly there's no direct evidence to convict her, but all the stories that I've reviewed, and I tell you, I've read a lot about these things, all of them tend to point in her direction for leaving the keys of the car. But these are things, look, nobody is perfect in this life. So I will really look at the accomplishments, the good things that she did, not only for herself and her family, but for the country, in particular for women.
Well, Prof, thank you for bringing all of that to light. I'm quite curious, moving on, what kind of qualities from this First Lady would you like to see in other First Ladies that would be emerging?
Interesting. You know, normally First Ladies are a bit timid for all kinds of reasons. Maybe some husbands don't want their wives to be at the forefront of politics. So you can understand that. And if I look back from Nkrumah's era, I cannot identify any First Lady who was so politically engaged as Konadu Agyeman-Rawlings. You know, first I Nkrumah, perhaps being foreign, did not want to meddle in politics, or perhaps the wife told her not to do that. Subsequently, all the military regime that we had, the wives of the military rulers were a little bit laid back. In this Fourth Republic, from Rawlings, I think in the Republic, Nana Konadu continued in different ways to push the advocacy for women empowerment. And since then, I cannot identify any other First Lady who have been so engaged, so passionate about the issue of women, and supportive of measures by her husband's government to achieve goals. So I can single her out as perhaps one First Lady who was all over the place, pushing her ideas, pushing her women advocacy, supporting her husband. And I think overall, that for me is very, very impressive.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about her advocacy at the Beijing conference, which to a large extent has impacted women in this country. While we reflect on that, what can you share?
Well, you see, I've already established the fact that she was a champion of women advocacy, so it was no surprise that she went to Beijing for the women event. And she was a star there. By the way, let me also tell you, I was in Zimbabwe some years back, as not only the wife of Mugabe, who was a Ghanaian, that influenced the women, they were also influenced by the way Nana Konadu was always dressed in our traditional clothing. She was always promoting that. So when I was in Zimbabwe, I heard this story, how they have been impressed by Nana Konadu, as well as the lady's name I've forgotten, the wife of Mugabe, who was also a Ghanaian. So I think that part of her life went beyond the borders of Ghana. It went beyond that. And when she was advocating, she wasn't only targeting Ghanaian women, she was also Pan-Africanist in the sense that she was talking mostly for African women across the board. And that also made her well known on the continent by women groups and women leaders. So she really made an impact. She made an impact. Yes, she made an impact.
One of the controversial aspects of her political career was her decision to break away from the NDC, start the NDP. Do you think that was a mistake?
I cannot judge that. You see, I've been talking about her courage. Not every person, especially being a co-founder, I even understand if it's true that perhaps the flag of the NDC was designed by her. I've heard true or not, we have to verify. So she was an integral part of the founding of the NDC. And for her to decide, and her husband, by the way, at the time, was still championing NDC. I don't know how the family house looked like when the wife is driving this track and the husband is also on that track. I don't know. And the children, I don't know that. But the fact is that you must have courage to do what she did. And for me, that's what's impressive. Whether it was a mistake or not, she led her life. And to the end, I don't think she terribly offended anybody. She was just a political animal, and she showed it in many ways, including forming her own political party. That's quite impressive. I cannot recall any woman in our political history who really, if I'm mistaken, please help me, but I can't recall any woman who really formed her own party, breaking away from original party and forming. I can't recall any besides Konadu Agyeman-Rawlings.
Prof, I mean, you have used the word courage countless times. If we were to use another word to describe her, what would that be?
A passion for the women advocacy. You know, if you study her life, and I will not claim to be the best student of it, but I think my return to Ghana back in 1994, when I started engaging in Ghanaian politics, I followed her when Rawlings was serving as an elected president. And unfortunately, I didn't meet her one-on-one except one occasion where at a function, I took a picture with her and we spoke at length. You see, everything she did was based on courage. First, that advocacy, that impresses me. The fact that she broke away, you need somebody with courage to do that, especially when your family is divided in terms of political allegiance, you know. Then, of course, things that we don't know, but people speculate she was involved with. And if you don't know also, let me tell you, I was in a program, a small group of people where 1997, President Rawlings addressed his newly appointed ambassadors around the world. And I recall vividly, in the course of, you know how he spoke, around there at one point, said, I wish Nana Konadu was by my side, because she normally would check how I speak. I'm quoting it directly. And that also told me a lot, that perhaps Nana Konadu was a big check on the behavior of the husband. Because she said it publicly. I recall that, you see. So that tells you that perhaps there were certain things she did. Because if you know how rambunctious Rawlings was, you need to have a strong woman to be able to control him. And I think to a large extent, Nana Konadu did that. So her courage is not only in the public things that we saw, but also perhaps behind the scenes, what she did to bring some sanity in the way her husband was doing things. And I think that was also quite something.
I mean, Prof, what would you, if Donato and her siblings were watching and listening to you now, what would you say to them?
Oh, well, certainly this is a sad day to miss your father and 3 or so years to introduce your mother. So far, the mother has been playing the dual role of father and mother successfully. So certainly we have to console them and assure them that the whole nation is behind them. But you see, life is something nobody controls. Nobody can control life. You can't control your destiny even in that respect. So as bad as this is, they should accept it and just pray that whatever legacy we left behind will be continued by those who really admire women leadership. And I think in all this case, I'm sure they all have their own life to live. One has entered politics. The others, I'm not sure what they do, but I'm sure they are all pursuing their lives. So they should take heart and just know that the nation cannot forget their parents. And I mean that, their parents. And when I say that, I will also add for better or for worse. Because I know the controversies surrounding the father in particular. Nonetheless, they all deserve their place in the history of our country.
Well, Prof, thank you. But finally, before maybe I let you go, would you support the calls for a state funeral?
Look, this First Lady has been the longest First Lady in our country. That's a distinction. Then you look at things that she's done, like I've enumerated some of most of them here. state funeral, not in terms of the head of state funeral, but we have different gradations of state funeral. But certainly, she deserves one of those grades. It will be up to the government to determine. But I know that there are gradations, and she deserves some kind of respect for a country that she served for almost 20 years in politics.
Well, any other fond memories of her, lighter moments you may want to share?
Well, you see, I wasn't that close to her, I have to admit. That day we met at that function, we had some interesting conversations. You know, at times, you know, I'm a bit political. And I'm sure that her husband didn't fancy me. But at that point, we talked generally, and I commended her for her work on the women advocacy and her courage that I've been talking about all the time. You know, in many ways, she reminds me of Nana Yasatua.
Wow.
I'm not surprised that they named a child after Yasantua's.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask, what can we do to remember her, to keep her in our memory as a country, looking at the sort of contribution she has made on the country?
It's one of the issues. What you just asked is an issue that we seldom discuss, and if we do, nothing happens, you know. We don't seem to have a culture of honoring people who have served this country in many ways. Look, even if the person was not the best that we expected, there must be some aspects of the person's life that we must cherish. There's no national policy that a late First Lady or President should be honored in some ways. You know, President Amil's memorial was built, I know. But we don't, of course, it might have been built. But she was not the president, so we can't go to that level. But I would suppose that the children, they are not sorry. I use the term children, but I'm sorry. They are grown-ups. The children, they should be able to think as a family to determine how they honor their parents. Oftentimes, if we want to wait on government to do things in this country, nothing happens. And I think they have the standing to champion that kind of memorial that they will want to do for her. I know that when they formed the Rawlings Foundation, the gentleman who was appointed to head it, he came to my office, he spoke for about 2 hours, trying to give him some insights of what I've been doing with the foundation. And then he went back. Occasionally, I hear of the foundation. But I think this is a time that the children, with support from friends and others, can seriously consider some kind of a monument, be it a museum, because you see, the collection of this woman and her husband alone can fill an edifice for museum. And we have to develop the culture of preserving the mementos of important people who have served this country. So if the government is not going to do it, I think the medical doctor and the other siblings, they can put their heads together. And if the General PC is still running the foundation, see how they can consolidate and expand it to bring the mother into that foundation so they can continuously honor the husband.
Well, Prof, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, maybe again before I let you go, prior to you telling us today that you were not quite close to her, on a lighter note, did you get people asking you, are you related in any way because of your surname? Did you get questions like that? Because of the Agyeman?
Oh,
not much.
I think our faces are too different for the name to bring it. Yeah.
Okay.
She has a more beautiful face than mine, so I don't think so. But certainly, there was an occasion when somebody thought, because I'm Agyeman, I'm related. But I know her father, as she described earlier in the thing that you played, her father was a very prominent man in Kumasi, I think a banker, if I remember, very prominent family she comes from. So Agyeman is a popular one among those Asante. So I know, not at all.
Prof, I like the scratch in your head, but thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, and it's nice to know that for a woman we're remembering, we're not so much in tears, but rather celebrating her. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on her as well.
Right.